Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and South Park is back with another episode, so I'm back with another review. But first, I just wanted to make an addendum to my previous South Park review, Holiday Special. In that, I said that the ending wasn't very funny and seemed a bit random. Well, apparently, this was mirroring real-life events where multiple places have renamed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, thereby making that punchline relevant and adding another layer to it that makes it more funny and more clever. Similarly, I never mentioned anything about the Kendrick Lamar parody in the first episode of the season, or the fact that Cartman's rap in the second episode was apparently a parody of a real-life rapper. But that's just kind of the way things go on South Park. When the show is so predicated on pop culture events and news articles and politics, you do kind of have to be super up on things to understand every single reference. And in these instances, I don't think it's a failure on the writer's part at all to include these things. I don't have to understand every single joke in the episode to still enjoy the episode as a whole. Now, if the episode doesn't make a lick of sense and isn't funny at all unless you explicitly understand certain very topical news things, then I think you've messed up. I see a lot of people arguing that South Park has become too political, and then I see a lot of people counter-arguing, well, South Park's always been political from day one. Even in the early seasons, they've tackled things like gun control and gay rights. But here's the thing, and I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but when I use the argument that South Park has become too political and too topical, I don't mean it to say South Park should stop being political at all, because of course that is a part of the show's DNA, and I do think it's something that most of the time they're rather good at. But what I think makes it too much is the fact that so many episodes in recent seasons haven't made reference to current events or political things so much as they've literally one-to-one parodied it, so much so that it feels like they go too close to real life and stop telling an actual entertaining and interesting story. And in the past, it seems like they also chose topics that were more general. Things like making fun of how awful mentalists and cold readers are, or pointing out at how much more concerned people are about nudity than violence. Or the episode about curse words where the S word is said on TV. Even if I couldn't tell you the specific news article or the specific scandal South Park was referencing in these episodes that took place over a decade ago, I still understand the story and the topic at hand because it's not so reliant on a very specific current event as much as it is controversies and things that have been going on for a long time and will continue to go on in the future. Why am I spending so much time on this? Because it ties into the episode I'm going to be reviewing today, franchise Prequel, which, despite seeming to be about Coon and Friends, is actually a lot more about fake news, Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg, which is just kind of a sad bait and switch to those of us who want original story-based episodes like Awesemo. So I come into this episode with a somewhat unusual perspective of being someone who is not currently on Facebook, and although I've heard a bit about fake news, it's not a story that I've personally been following. So unfortunately, a lot of this episode kind of went over my head, especially in regards to Mark Zuckerberg. Basically, while I was watching the episode for the first time, I was trying to play the game of, what is this referencing? Like, obviously they were trying to do something there with Kung Fu movies with him being dubbed over, but I didn't, and still really don't understand the connection between that and Mark Zuckerberg. Does Mark like Kung Fu movies? Are they making fun of the way he talks? I just don't know. Furthermore, I was questioning why he looks the way he does. Is this just South Park's typical over-exaggeration of a celebrity's features, or is there something more to this? And as it turns out, there is something more to this. Mark Zuckerberg recently came out with these VR emojis that allows you to put these really awkward-looking CG models inside 360 videos, and his caricature in the episode resembles the weird 3D emoji of him that he presented. But without knowing that very specific piece of news, you're just kind of scratching your head as to what the deal is with this. And here's the thing. You might be thinking, well, Pie Guy, you're in the extreme minority for not using Facebook and not being up about the whole fake news thing. And hey, you're totally right about this right now. But think about in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. Are people going to still be talking about fake news? It's possible, I suppose, but more likely than not, if you watch this episode 5-10 years from now, you're going to be incredibly confused about half the stuff in it. Watching the episode a second time, however, it is a little bit clear what's going on here. It's like the police officers say. The people invited Mark Zuckerberg into this town, i.e. they invited Facebook into their lives, so it's their own fault when they're falling for quote-unquote fake news, and it's not the police's job to take it down. Which is a fair point and is something they say in the episode, so I can't really claim that they didn't explain it well enough. But I have to say, I do think that the main storyline and the text of the episode is a lot weaker because they decided to focus so much on the subtext. Also, the bit with Putin was way too on the nose. I really didn't find Mark Zuckerberg here to be funny. Like his kung fu shtick and his doing his own sound effects and the fact that he's got a really terrible microphone, I just didn't find it funny. I found it weird. I was confused. Even once I understood what they were kind of referencing, I was still a bit confused. And I know it's super subjective, but so much of the episode is predicated on you finding this character to be funny, and I just don't. But that being said, there were a lot of other funny lines. The best one being the intro, where it's revealed that Jimmy's superhero name is Fast Pass, and other stuff like the parents not knowing that their kids are the superheroes, despite the fact that it's incredibly obvious. Oh, and of course, I need to mention that Heidi shows up again in this episode, and it's really awful. She shows up, Cartman puts his hand in his face and just kind of hates her presence. There's an awkward silence and she leaves. She serves no point to anything. I guess it was supposed to be a joke, but all it does is bring the entire episode to a standstill for some really slow, really awkward, quote-unquote, comedy. Hey, I definitely empathize with Cartman at this point, because his reaction in this episode is pretty much my reaction whenever she shows up on this show. I would say that this is going to set up a really great punchline at the end of the season with her, but knowing how awful South Park has historically been with ending their season-long storylines, I'm not holding my breath. Another thing non-Facebook related that's really sucky about this episode is their Netflix parody. The whole joke is that Netflix will pick up any show. And that's literally the only joke they make about that. They have one line about there being a show with transsexual dragons, which may or may not be referring to anything specifically, but other than that, it's just literally the joke of, hey, Netflix will pick up anything. I mean, freaking Big Mouth came out last week. You're not gonna do anything about that, South Park? There was a lot more that could have been done there, but much like how the member berries were way too Star Wars obsessed, this Netflix joke was really one note. On the more positive side of things, though, it was nice to see the boys in their superhero outfits again, and Butters as Professor Chaos being the one that's been spreading all the fake news does make a lot of sense from a story perspective, considering Butters probably sees it as the sort of little innocent pranking that he used to do as Professor Chaos, not really realizing that he's legitimately doing harm here. And I did like the whole cinematic universe references and jokes they put in the episode, like Butters mentioning that there's been really no villain movie outside of Suicide Squad, which was awful. So yeah, there's some good things, some bad things. I round this episode off to a lower, middle of the road one. With that being said, though, I have seen a lot of people enjoy this episode, and I will admit that if you've been following the fake news stuff and you know a little bit more about Zuckerberg, you'll probably get a lot more out of this episode than I did. I'm not saying that South Park needs to cater to my needs specifically, or that they should never mention anything topical or in the news because people might not get it. But I definitely do wish that they were a little more original with their stories, and that they focus a little more on the layer of just fun South Park story and a little less on the layer of satire. A great episode that contrasts this one would be Man Bear Pig, which is an episode that is about making fun of Al Gore and his preachiness, but at the same time is also an original story about the boys meeting this strange man and getting locked in the cave. Or another good example is Butters' very own episode, which aired over 15 years ago but is still fun to watch today, even though the political side of that episode is incredibly dated, and in fact the ideas presented in it turned out to be wrong. The people that South Park thought so obviously had been involved in murders turned out to be exonerated. And yet despite that, the episode is still fun because it is mostly about Butters and his messed up family. Even though there's that layer of subtext and commentary and satire, it is still its own original story that you don't need to know about the politics behind to understand and enjoy. But that's just my take on things. What did you think of this episode? PIEGUYRULZ, out.